The clinking of silverware echoed through the dimly lit restaurant, a place that prided itself on elegance and sophistication. The air was thick with the scent of gourmet dishes, and patrons murmured quietly, enjoying their meals. But amid the laughter and chatter, something dark simmered beneath the surface. A moment of cruelty was about to unfold, one that no one in this fine establishment would ever forget. It all began when a man walked into the restaurant, his stride confident, his presence commanding. His skin, a rich shade of brown, stood in stark contrast to the white polished marble floors and the pristine atmosphere of the establishment. He was dressed casually, no expensive suit, no designer tie, just a simple black t-shirt and jeans. He looked like any other customer, though there was something different about him, something that few could place. As he approached the hostess, her polite smile faltered for just a second. She hesitated, her eyes scanning him up and down, unsure of what to make of him. He was clearly out of place in this upscale restaurant, but she quickly regained her composure and asked in a smooth voice, "Table for one, sir?" "Yes," he replied with a calm yet firm voice. She led him through the dining area, her eyes flicking nervously to the waitstaff. They watched him walk by with curiosity, whispers passing between them. One waiter, a tall man with a slicked back, hairstyle and a well-maintained uniform, looked at the newcomer and scoffed under his breath. He couldn't help but let out a chuckle, the kind that came from a place of superiority, as if he had already decided what kind of man this was. Probably another one of those types who thinks they can just walk into a place like this and fit in, he muttered to a colleague, his voice low but unmistakable. The waiter, who went by the name Greg, had been working at this restaurant for years. He prided himself on being one of the best servers in the city, confident in his skills and experience. He believed that some people just didn't belong in places like this. And when he saw this man, walking in like he owned the place, he immediately decided that it was his job to put him in his place. He had seen plenty of people like him before, people who didn't know their place in society, let alone in a fine dining establishment. Greg's thoughts turned sharp, like a knife, as he watched the man sit down at a table in the corner of the room. The man was alone, seemingly unaffected by the eyes that followed him. Greg's irritation flared. He had always been taught to respect customers, but there was something about this one that rubbed him the wrong way. His demeanor, his confidence, even the casualness of his attire, it didn't fit the image of a regular customer. Without thinking, Greg approached the table, ready to do what he thought was his duty. "Good evening, sir," Greg said, his voice oozing with a false politeness. "Welcome to our restaurant. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Would you like to start with a drink?" The man looked up, his eyes calm but piercing. "Water, please," he said, his tone even, yet carrying an air of authority that made Greg hesitate for just a moment. But Greg pushed it aside, convinced that he was still the one in control here. As Greg returned with the water, he made sure to set it down just a little too forcefully, the glass clinking loudly on the table. "Anything else I can get for you?" he asked, his voice dripping with a subtle mockery, but he kept it just professional enough to avoid any real confrontation. The man gave him a brief smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll take a moment to look over the menu," he said, his voice smooth but unyielding. Greg didn't like the way he spoke. Too calm, too sure of himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that this man was acting like he belonged here, like he was someone important. Greg's patience was wearing thin. He returned to the kitchen, but as he passed through the swinging door, he couldn't help but overhear the comments from the other waitstaff. "Who does that guy think he is?" one of them whispered. "Doesn't he know where he is?" Greg smirked, feeling validated in his earlier judgment. As he checked in with his colleagues, he came to a decision. He would make this man's dining experience as uncomfortable as possible. After all, people like him didn't belong in places like this. Maybe a little lesson in humility would do him some good. Later, as the man made his way through the evening, Greg's passive-aggressive attitude became more obvious. He delivered the wrong courses to the table, made sure to knock over silverware, and even feigned ignorance when asked about certain items on the menu. All the while, he kept a smug look on his face, certain that this was all some sort of game. He could easily win. But there was something he hadn't considered. The man never flinched. He never raised his voice. He simply remained composed, though the tension in the air was building. Something was going to snap. Greg could feel it. The man's patience seemed unending, but it was clear he was no fool. Finally, after the fourth, or fifth mistake that Greg had made intentionally, the man set down his glass with a soft clink. He looked up at Greg, his eyes locking onto his with such intensity that it made Greg's heart skip a beat. "Do you know who I am?" the man asked, his voice low but carrying an undeniable weight. Greg blinked, surprised by the question. "I know exactly who you are," Greg said, trying to maintain his composure, though there was a tremor in his voice. "You're just another customer who doesn't know how to act in a place like this." The man didn't smile. "Well, let me correct you. I am the owner of this restaurant. I think it's time we had a little talk about what's been happening tonight." Greg froze, his mind racing. The words didn't make sense. The owner of the restaurant? The man dressed in casual clothes? The man who had been so patient despite all of Greg's disrespect? It couldn't be. But the fear in the man's gaze told a different story. Something was terribly wrong. The air in the restaurant seemed to thicken, the once warm atmosphere now heavy with tension. Greg's breath quickened as he stammered, You're the owner? But you don't look..." The man stood up, slowly, his eyes never leaving Greg's face. "It's funny how people like you judge others based on what they see. Let me show you what happens when you treat people with disrespect." Greg's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the other patrons on him now, but he didn't dare look away. He wanted to run, but he was frozen, caught in the gaze of a man who had far more power than he ever could have imagined. The story was far from over, and in that moment Greg realized that he had just made one of the biggest mistakes of his life. The tables had turned, but how would they play out? Would Greg be given a chance to redeem himself? Or would this be the moment he lost everything? Greg's heart raced as the man stood up, his frame tall and commanding. The air in the restaurant had shifted, turning from casual elegance to something far more intense. The murmurs from the surrounding tables seemed to vanish as if the entire room was holding its breath. Greg stood there, staring at the man in disbelief, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. He had messed up badly. But what was he supposed to do now? He had spent years in this restaurant, priding himself on his ability to control any situation. Customers had always been predictable. They came in, ordered their food, and left with a smile, or with a complaint if Greg made a mistake. But this was different. The man before him wasn't just another customer. He was the very thing Greg had spent so many years thinking he could never be. Powerful, untouchable. The man didn't move, but his eyes were locked on Greg's, with an intensity that made him feel small, insignificant. He spoke again, his voice calm but firm, as if each word carried the weight of an unspoken truth. "Do you think I don't know what you've been doing? I've been watching you, Greg. I've been watching everything." Greg swallowed hard. His mind raced, searching for a way out. The room felt too small, the silence too loud. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, his words faltering. "I've been just doing my job. You didn't think I'd notice?" The man's voice was low, cutting through Greg's attempts to justify himself. "I noticed the wrong orders, the way you slammed the glass on my table, the way you treated me like I didn't belong here. I noticed all of it." Greg's hands shook as he clenched them into fists at his sides. His mind was spinning. How had this man been watching him? Was it all just a coincidence? Or had he known from the beginning? The questions piled up, but Greg couldn't find the answers. "Not yet. I didn't mean to..." Greg began, his voice shaking now, but the man cut him off. "No," the man said, his gaze unwavering. "You meant every bit of it. I could see it in your eyes. You thought I was nothing more than another type of person who didn't belong in a restaurant like this, didn't you?" Greg's stomach churned. The man's words hit harder than any slap could have. He had known. Greg had thought he was being subtle, that no one would notice. His disdain. But the truth was clear now. The man had seen right through him. "I'm sorry," Greg muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to disrespect you. I was wrong." The man's eyes softened for just a moment, but there was no pity there. Instead, there was a glimmer of something else, something far more dangerous. "Sorry doesn't fix the damage you've caused, Greg, and I'm afraid it's too late for apologies." Greg's throat tightened. He could feel the weight of the man's words hanging over him, suffocating him. What had he done? How had he let his own biases and arrogance lead him to this point? He had always prided himself on his quick wit, on his ability to stay ahead of every situation, but now he felt out of his depth. The man continued to stand there, unmoving, while Greg tried to process everything that was happening. The restaurant around them was silent now, all eyes on the two of them. Some patrons were too afraid to speak, while others exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react. Everyone seemed to know something Greg didn't. "Do you know who I am now?" The man's voice was steady, but there was a hint of something more, something that sent a chill down Greg's spine. Greg nodded quickly, though the words felt like they were stuck in his throat. He wanted to apologize, to explain himself, to make this right somehow, but deep down he knew there was no going back. The damage had already been done. The man didn't give him a chance to speak further. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek business card. He held it out to Greg, who hesitated before taking it, his hand still trembling. "Read it," the man said simply, his voice not unkind but carrying an air of finality. Greg's fingers trembled as he turned the card over, his eyes scanning the elegant print. The name on the card was simple, but the title beneath it sent a shock through him. Owner and CEO of this establishment. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just some rich customer with an inflated sense of importance. This was the man who owned the very restaurant he had worked at for years. The man who could make or break his entire career with a single word. The gravity of the situation started to sink in, and the implications were terrifying. "You own this place?" Greg asked, his voice barely audible. His breath caught in his chest as he finally understood the full extent of his mistake. He had mocked and disrespected the man who had the power to destroy his life in an instant. The man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I do," he said simply. "And I've been letting you get away with this behavior for far too long. You've crossed a line, Greg, and now there's only one thing left to do." Greg's mind raced, searching for a way to fix this, to make it right. "Please, I'm sorry," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. I never meant to hurt you. I was wrong. Please, just give me a chance to—" The man raised a hand, silencing him. "This isn't about chances anymore. You've shown me exactly who you are, Greg. And now, I have to decide what comes next." Greg's breath quickened as the man's words hit him like a cold wave. What was he going to do? Was he going to fire him on the spot? Was this the end of everything? The man paused, looking Greg up and down. For a brief moment, Greg thought he might be spared. Maybe there was still hope. But the man's next words shattered that fragile hope. "I've seen how you treat people, how you think you're better than them. It's time to teach you a lesson, Greg. You're going to have to work a lot harder to earn back my respect, and that's going to start with you facing the consequences of your actions." Greg's stomach dropped. He had no idea what that meant, but he was certain it wasn't going to be easy. As the man turned and walked away, leaving Greg standing there in the middle of the restaurant, the weight of the situation became clear. The customers, the waitstaff, everyone was watching him now. The eyes that had once been full of curiosity and judgment were now full of something else. Anticipation. The tension in the room was thick, and Greg had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was certain. This was just the beginning.